Why would God choose a man who clearly didn't want the job? God showed up in a burning bush, in the middle of a desert, to a man who had been hiding for 40 years. And he said, I've seen the suffering of my people. I've heard them crying, and I'm sending you to set them free. And the man standing in front of that bush, barefoot because God told him to take off his sandals, this man who God handpicked from the entire human race to lead the greatest rescue mission in history, looked at the fire, looked at God, and said, please send someone else. Not, I'm honored. Not, I'm ready. Not, here I am, Lord. He said, send someone else. Anyone else. Literally anyone but me. I love this moment, not because it's heroic, because it's honest. Because every person watching this right now has had their own burning bush moment. That thing God put in front of you, a conversation you need to have, a decision you've been avoiding, a calling you keep running from. And you looked at it and said the same thing Moses said. I can't. I'm not qualified. I don't have the right words. I've made too many mistakes. Nobody will listen to me. Send someone else. Moses gave God 5 excuses, 5 different reasons why he was the wrong man. He argued with the creator of the universe like a kid arguing with his mother about going to school on a Monday morning. And God, patient, persistent, slightly annoyed by the 5th excuse, sent him anyway. Because here's what I've learned, and it took me a long time to learn it. God doesn't call people who are ready. He calls people who are willing to be made ready. And sometimes, even willing is generous. Sometimes he just calls people who eventually stop saying no. That's Moses, the reluctant prophet, the man with a stutter who freed a nation, the runaway who became a leader, the excuse maker who split an ocean. And if God can use a man who said, send someone else 5 times, he can use you, exactly as you are, with every excuse you've ever made still echoing in your head. This is his story. Welcome to Word to Life. Moses' story begins in the worst way a story can begin, with a government trying to kill babies. Pharaoh, the ruler of Egypt, looked at the Hebrew slaves and saw a problem. There were too many of them. They were growing, multiplying, and one day they might realize that millions of slaves are stronger than one king. So Pharaoh issued an order. Every Hebrew baby boy born in Egypt must be thrown into the Nile River. Think about that. This is a government policy. Systematic, organized, babies, drowned, because a king was afraid of what they might become. Into this nightmare, a Hebrew woman named Jochebed gave birth to a son, and she did what any mother would do. She hid him. For 3 months, she kept him quiet, kept him alive, kept him invisible in a world that wanted him dead. But you can only hide a baby for so long. They cry, they move, they grow. So Jochebed made a decision that required more faith than most of us will ever need in a lifetime. She built a basket, waterproofed it with tar and pitch, placed her 3-month-old son inside, and set him floating on the Nile River. The same river that Pharaoh was using to kill Hebrew babies became the delivery system for the man who would destroy Pharaoh's empire. Let that settle for a second, because that's God's humor. It's dark, it's ironic, and it's surgical in its precision. The basket floated downstream, past crocodiles, past currents, past every danger that should have ended the story on page 1. And it stopped, because baskets don't navigate, which means something else was steering, at the feet of the one person in all of Egypt who could save this child, Pharaoh's daughter. She was bathing in the Nile. She saw the basket. She opened it, and inside was a crying baby boy, a Hebrew baby, the very kind of baby her father had ordered killed. And she had compassion. That's the word the Bible uses, compassion. Not pity, not curiosity, compassion. The kind of feeling that makes you act against your own interest, the kind that makes a princess defy a king. She adopted him, named him Moses, drawn out of water. And the boy who should have been drowned, by Pharaoh's order, was raised in Pharaoh's palace, by Pharaoh's family, with Pharaoh's education, on Pharaoh's dime. God used the enemy's house to train the man who would bring the enemy down. Moses learned Egyptian law, military strategy, languages, diplomacy, court politics, everything he would need 40 years later to stand in that same palace and say, "Let my people go." But Moses didn't know any of that. He grew up Egyptian, dressed Egyptian, spoke Egyptian, ate from golden plates while his biological family ate from the dirt. He was a prince in a palace built by slaves. And for 40 years he existed in that contradiction without examining it. Until one day he walked outside the palace walls and saw something that tore the contradiction wide open. An Egyptian overseer beating a Hebrew slave, whipping him, in the dust, in the heat, like an animal. And something inside Moses, something that had been asleep for 40 years, something connected to a basket and a river and a mother who loved him enough to let him go, woke up. He looked around. No one was watching, and he killed the Egyptian, buried the body in the sand, and thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. Someone saw. Word reached Pharaoh, and Moses, the prince, the adopted son, the man who had everything, ran into the desert, into nothing. He ended up in Midian, a place so empty that even the maps forgot about it. He married a shepherd's daughter, and for 40 years, 40, he tended sheep. Think about who Moses was at this point. Hebrew by blood, Egyptian by education, fugitive by guilt. He belonged nowhere. He was too Egyptian for the Hebrews and too Hebrew for the Egyptians. He was a man without a people, living in a land without a name, doing work without a purpose. 40 years. The man who grew up in the most powerful palace on earth spent the second half of his life talking to animals in the desert, from penthouse to pasture, from I can do anything to I am nothing. And here's the thing nobody tells you about those 40 years. They were necessary, not wasted, necessary. Because God can't use a man who thinks he can do everything. He can only use a man who knows he can do nothing and trust God to do the rest. The palace made Moses educated. The desert made Moses usable. But God wasn't done dismantling Moses. Because what happened next, on the far side of a desert that nobody visits, in front of a bush that burned without burning, would turn an 80-year-old shepherd into the most reluctant hero in human history. And it started with 5 excuses. Moses was 80 years old. 80. Let me say that again, because I think we rush past it. 80. Most people at 80 are thinking about retirement, grandchildren, which knee hurts worse today. Moses was thinking about sheep. He was on the far side of the desert, the backside of nowhere, tending his father-in-law's flock, not even his own sheep. He was an 80-year-old man working someone else's job in a place nobody had heard of, doing work that nobody noticed. And that's exactly where God found him, because God has a habit of finding people at their most invisible. David was in a field. Gideon was hiding in a winepress. Esther was an orphan in a harem. And Moses was babysitting sheep in a desert that didn't even have a name worth remembering. The bush was on fire, but it wasn't burning. That's the detail that caught Moses' attention. Fire consumes. That's what fire does. But this fire just existed. It sat on the branches like light, not heat, like presence, not destruction. Moses said, "Let me go and see this strange sight. Why is the bush not burning up?" And God spoke from the bush, "Moses, Moses, here I am. Do not come any closer. Remove your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." Moses hid his face. He was afraid to look at God, which is the correct response. Anyone who claims they wouldn't be afraid in that moment has never met anything bigger than themselves. Then God said why he was there. And this is where the story pivots. This is where a shepherd's life ends and a liberator's life begins. I have certainly seen the affliction of my people in Egypt. I have heard their outcry because of their taskmasters. I know well the pain they are suffering. I am going to bring them out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey. Now come, I am sending you to Pharaoh, and you will bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. You, an 80-year-old shepherd with a criminal record and a speech impediment. You, a man who's been hiding for 4 decades. You, the last person on earth who would raise his hand for this job. You, and Moses, standing barefoot on holy ground with fire on his face and the voice of God in his ears, did what any normal, honest, terrified human being would do. He started making excuses. Excuse number one, who am I to go to Pharaoh? Who am I to bring the Israelites out of Egypt? God's answer, I will be with you. That's it. No pep talk. No motivational speech. No, you're stronger than you think, Moses. Just, I will be with you, because God's presence is the only qualification that matters. You can be unqualified, undereducated, underprepared, and underestimated. And if God is with you, you have everything you need. Excuse number two, if I go to the Israelites and say God sent me, they'll ask, what's his name? What do I tell them? God's answer, I am who I am. Tell them I am sent you, the most powerful name ever spoken. Not I was, not I will be, I am. Present tense, eternal tense. Every tense at once. A name that says I am here, right now, in this burning bush, in your fear, in your excuse. I am. Excuse number three. What if they don't believe me? What if they don't listen? God gave him signs. His staff became a snake. His hand became leprous and then healed. Water became blood. 3 miracles. Not to impress, to authenticate, because sometimes faith needs a receipt. Excuse number 4. I'm not a good speaker, God. I'm slow of speech. I stutter. I stumble over words. I can't stand in front of Pharaoh and talk. I'll fall apart. And God's response to this one is my favorite verse in the entire Bible. It's 5 sentences, and it dismantles every insecurity you've ever had. Who made the human mouth? Who makes a person speechless or deaf or able to see or blind? Is it not I, Jehovah? Now go. I will be with your mouth, and I will teach you what to say. Read that again. God didn't heal Moses' stutter. He didn't fix the problem. He said, I made your mouth. Your stutter isn't a mistake. Your weakness isn't a glitch. I designed it, and I will use it. Because when a man who can barely speak sets an entire nation free, nobody looks at the man. They look at God. And that's the point. Your weakness is not the end of your calling. In God's hands, even what feels broken becomes part of the testimony. God builds his greatest work through the cracks. And then came excuse number 5, the final one, the one that made God angry. Please, Jehovah, send someone else. 5 excuses deep, standing in front of a burning bush, with God speaking directly to him. And Moses says, not me, anybody but me. Send someone else. The Bible says God's anger burned against Moses, not because Moses was afraid, God understands fear, but because Moses was saying something deeper than fear. He was saying, God, you made a mistake choosing me. And that's the one thing God won't tolerate. Not because he has an ego, because he doesn't make mistakes. God said, what about your brother Aaron? He speaks well. He will be your mouth. You will put words in his mouth, and I will be with both of you. Now go. And Moses, 80 years old, barefoot, terrified, armed with nothing but a shepherd's stick and a God who wouldn't take no for an answer, went. But here's the part nobody warns you about. And Moses went, at 80 years old, with a staff, a stutter, and a God who doesn't take no for an answer. But when he finally obeyed and went back to Egypt, things didn't get better. They got worse, much worse. Moses walked into Pharaoh's palace, the same hallways he ran through as a boy, the same palace he grew up in, the same throne room where he once sat at the prince's table. But he wasn't a prince anymore. He was an 80-year-old shepherd with a stick and a message. Jehovah, the God of Israel, says, let my people go. Pharaoh's response was predictable. The powerful always respond the same way when the powerless ask for freedom. He laughed. "Who is Jehovah? I don't know this God, and I will not let Israel go." And then he made things worse. He increased the slaves' workload, took away their straw but demanded the same number of bricks, punished them for Moses' audacity, because that's what tyrants do. When someone speaks up, the tyrant punishes everyone to make the speaker look like the villain. The Israelites blame Moses. "You've made us stink in Pharaoh's eyes. You've put a sword in his hand to kill us." This is the part nobody talks about. The people Moses came to save turned on him immediately. And it's the most realistic thing in the entire story, because when you try to lead people out of something, an addiction, a bad relationship, a toxic situation, they often hate you for it before they thank you. Change feels like death before it feels like freedom. Moses went back to God. "Why have you brought trouble on these people? Why did you send me?" And God said, "Now you will see what I will do to Pharaoh." Then came the plagues, 10 of them, each one more devastating than the last, each one an escalation, each one a message. Water turned to blood. The Nile, Egypt's lifeline, the river they worshipped as a god, turned red. The fish died. The water stank. The river that was supposed to drown Hebrew babies was now choking Egypt. Frogs, everywhere, in the beds, in the ovens, in the kneading troughs. Pharaoh begged Moses to make them stop. Moses did. Pharaoh hardened his heart. Gnats, from the dust of the earth. Pharaoh's own magicians couldn't replicate it. They said, "This is the finger of God." Even the enemy's advisors recognized the truth. But Pharaoh didn't listen. Power makes you deaf. Flies, livestock disease, boils on every Egyptian, hail that destroyed the crops, locusts that devoured what was left. And then, 3 days of total darkness. Not nighttime darkness, supernatural darkness, the kind you can feel, the kind that sits on your chest and makes it hard to breathe. 9 plagues, and after each one, the same pattern. Pharaoh would beg Moses to stop. Moses would stop, and Pharaoh would change his mind. This is what stubbornness looks like when it costs other people. Pharaoh's pride was destroying his country. His people were suffering. His economy was collapsing. His advisors were pleading, "Let them go. Can't you see Egypt is ruined?" But Pharaoh couldn't let go, because letting go meant admitting he was wrong. And for some people, being right is more important than being alive. Then God told Moses, one more plague, the last one. Every firstborn son in Egypt would die. Every family, every house, from Pharaoh's throne to the prisoner's cell. But God gave the Israelites a way out, a lamb, without blemish. Kill it. Put its blood on the doorposts of your house, and when the angel of death passes through Egypt tonight, he will pass over your home. The Passover, a night that still echoes 4,000 years later, in Jewish homes around the world, in church communion tables, in hospital chapels where people whisper, "God, pass over this room tonight. Not here, not my family." At midnight, the cry went up, not a sound you want to imagine. Every house in Egypt, every firstborn, including Pharaoh's own son. And Pharaoh, the man who asked, "Who is Jehovah?" found out. He called Moses, in the middle of the night, broken, grieving, a king brought to his knees not by an army, but by a shepherd with a stutter who wouldn't stop coming back. "Get up, get out, take your people, take your animals, take everything, and go." 600,000 men plus women and children walked out of Egypt that night. After 400 years of slavery, led by a man who stuttered, a man who made 5 excuses, a man whose only qualification was 4 words from a burning bush, "I will be with you." But Pharaoh wasn't done. He made one final mistake, the kind of mistake that pride always makes. He chased people that God had already freed, but Pharaoh changed his mind, again, because tyrants don't learn, they adapt. He sent his army, 600 chosen chariots, plus every other chariot in Egypt, to bring the slaves back. The dust cloud was visible for miles. The sound of hooves and wheels and armor shaking the ground like an earthquake made of human intention. The Israelites looked behind them, the most powerful army on earth. They looked ahead, the Red Sea. No boats, no bridge, no plan, just water stretching to the horizon, deep and indifferent and impossibly wide. They did what people always do when the impossible is in front of them and the terrifying is behind them. They panicked, and they blamed Moses. Were there no graves in Egypt? Is that why you brought us out here? To die in the wilderness? We told you to leave us alone. Being a slave in Egypt was better than dying in the desert. I understand them, don't you? When you're stuck between something horrible and something impossible, go back to horrible, start sounding reasonable. At least horrible is familiar. At least you know the rules. The unknown is always scarier than the known, even when the known is killing you. But Moses, and this is the moment that earns him his place in history, not the plagues, not the palace confrontation, this. Moses stood in front of 2 million terrified people, with an army at his back and an ocean at his face, and he said, "Do not be afraid, stand firm, and see the salvation of Jehovah, which he will perform for you today. Jehovah will fight for you. You need only to be still. Be still, with chariots coming. Be still, with waves crashing. Be still, when everything in your body says, run." That's not motivational speaking. That's faith under fire. The kind of faith that can only come from a man who spent 40 years in a desert learning that God shows up when all other options have been exhausted. Then God told Moses, "Raise your staff over the sea." And Moses, the same man who said, "I can't speak," who said, "Who am I?" who said, "Please send someone else," raised a wooden stick over the Red Sea. A wind blew, all night, a strong east wind, and the sea divided. Walls of water on the left, walls of water on the right, dry ground in the middle. 2 million people walking through the impossible on a path that didn't exist 5 minutes ago. I want you to imagine that. Standing between two walls of water, knowing that the only thing keeping them vertical is the word of a God you can't see. Fish swimming at eye level, the bottom of an ocean under your feet, salt spray on your face, your children holding your hands, looking up at you with eyes that say, "Is this safe?" And you don't know. You just keep walking. The Egyptians followed, because of course they did. Pharaoh had learned nothing, and when the last Israelite stepped onto the far shore, Moses stretched his hand over the sea. The walls collapsed. The water returned. 600 chariots, their horses, their riders, swallowed. In seconds. Like the ocean had been holding its breath and finally exhaled. The Israelites stood on the far shore, wet, shaking, alive. And they looked back at the closed sea and understood something that no speech, no sermon, no book could have taught them. The God who called a stuttering shepherd just split an ocean with a stick. Your excuse is not bigger than the Red Sea. Whatever stands between you and the thing God is calling you to, fear, doubt, a past, a record, a stutter, a diagnosis, an age, a zip code, it's just water. And God knows how to move water. Moses still happens, every day, in cities you've never heard of, in lives you've never seen. Let me tell you about one of them. If you've ever felt like Moses, standing between something terrifying behind you and something impossible in front of you, write, "I've been there," in the comments. Because you're not alone. And the God who split the sea for a stuttering shepherd is the same God standing with you right now. Let me be honest with you for a minute, because I think you came to this video for a reason, and I don't think that reason is history. Moses gave God 5 excuses, and I've been thinking about which one of those excuses sounds most like mine, and maybe most like yours. Who am I? That's the identity excuse. The one that says, I'm nobody. I come from nothing. I don't have credentials. I don't have a platform. I don't have a name anyone recognizes. Who am I to think God would use me? God's answer is always the same. He doesn't answer the question. He redirects it. Who am I doesn't matter. Who is with you does. And the answer is, I am. What if they don't believe me? That's the credibility excuse. The one that says, people know my past. They know my failures. They know I'm not perfect. Why would they listen to me? Moses killed a man. He was a fugitive. He'd been gone for 40 years. Nobody in Egypt remembered him as a prince. They'd remember him, if at all, as a murderer. But God didn't need Moses to be credible. He needed Moses to be present. Credibility is a human requirement. God operates on a different system. He uses the unqualified to shut the mouths of the qualified. Because when a man with no resume changes the world has to look beyond the man to find the explanation. I can't speak well. That's the ability excuse, the most common one. I don't have the talent. I'm not smart enough. I'm not articulate enough. I'm not gifted enough. Moses stuttered, and God said, Who made your mouth? Not, I'll fix your mouth. Not, I'll take the stutter away. He said, I made your mouth with the stutter on purpose. Your weakness is not a manufacturing defect. It's a design feature. God builds highways through the cracks in people because smooth people don't need God. Broken people do. And broken people who let God work through the breaks change the world. And if you're still with me, still here, I want to say something quickly. If this video is resonating with you, if something inside you is stirring, subscribe. Not for me, for yourself. Because next week, and the week after, and the week after that, we're going to keep having these conversations. And something tells me you need them as much as I do. Okay, back to Moses. Because there's one more excuse, and it's the one that made God angry. Send someone else. This wasn't about fear anymore. This was about refusal. And refusal disguised as humility is still refusal. Sometimes I'm not ready means I'm not willing. And God knows the difference. He always knows the difference. Moses eventually went, not because he felt ready. He never felt ready. He went because God didn't give him a choice. Or rather, God gave him a choice and then stood there, burning, until Moses chose correctly. The Bible says, trust in Jehovah with all your heart, and do not rely on your own understanding. In all your ways take notice of him, and he will make your paths straight. Notice it doesn't say, understand your paths. It says, he will make them straight. You don't need to see the road. You need to trust the one who built it. But Moses' story doesn't end with victory. It ends with a mountain, a view, and a heartbreak that 4,000 years hasn't healed. Moses led the Israelites for 40 years in the wilderness, 40 more years of wandering, complaining, rebellion, miracles, manna from heaven, water from rock, and the constant, exhausting work of leading people who didn't want to be led. He received the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai. He built the tabernacle. He established the priesthood. He organized a nation from a mob of former slaves into a functioning society with laws, courts, and customs that still influence civilization today. And through all of it, every argument, every rebellion, every moment when the people said, let's go back to Egypt, Moses stayed. Not because he enjoyed it, because God told him to. But here's the part that breaks my heart about Moses' story. And I think it matters because it's the most human part. Moses never entered the promised land. After 40 years of leading, after the plagues and the Red Sea and the desert and the manna and the complaints and the worship and the golden calf and the rock and the water and the 10 Commandments carved by the finger of God, after all of it, Moses climbed a mountain, looked out over the land God had promised, and died there. God showed him everything, the valleys, the rivers, the hills, the cities that would be built, the children who would be born there, the future that his suffering made possible. And Moses saw it all, from a distance, the way you see a sunrise through a window, close enough to witness, too far to touch. Why? Because years earlier, in a moment of frustration, Moses struck a rock instead of speaking to it as God instructed. One act of disobedience, after decades of faithfulness, and it cost him the finish line. It feels unfair, and maybe it is by human standards. But I think there's something deeper happening. I think God was teaching one final lesson, not to Moses, but to us. The lesson is this: faithfulness is not measured by what you get, it's measured by what you give. Moses gave everything: his comfort, his safety, his voice, his years, his entire second half of life, and he never tasted the reward. But 2 million people did, because of him. The Bible says Moses died, and God buried him, personally, in a valley in Moab, and no one knows where his grave is to this day. God buried his servant with his own hands, in a secret place, like a father tucking in a child for the last time. 3 things from Moses that I carry with me, not as advice, as anchors. First, your past is not your future's landlord. Moses was a killer. That's his resume. Line 1, murdered a man, buried the evidence, ran, and God still chose him. Whatever is in your past, whatever you did, whatever was done to you, whatever you've been calling yourself at 3 a.m. when nobody else is awake, it does not own your future. God does not look at your history when he calls you. He looks at your heart. And your heart is the one thing you can always change. Jehovah does not see what man sees. Man looks at the outward appearance, but Jehovah looks at the heart. Second, your weakness is your starting point. God didn't fix Moses' stutter. Think about that. He had the power. He could have snapped his fingers and given Moses the voice of a politician, but he didn't. Because God doesn't work despite your weakness. He works through it. Paul had a thorn. David was small. Esther was an orphan. Job had nothing. Moses stuttered. And through every one of them, God did the impossible. Not in spite of their cracks, through them. If you feel unqualified for what God is asking you to do, congratulations. You're exactly his type. Third, the call never comes when you're ready. It comes when God is ready. Moses was 80. Abraham was 75. Noah was 600 when the flood came. God's timing and your timing are not the same. And waiting for the right moment to step out in faith is just another way of saying, send someone else. The burning bush doesn't come when you're prepared. It comes when you're in the desert. When you've given up. When you've accepted that this is all there is. Sheep, sand, silence. And then the bush catches fire, and your whole life changes. Stop waiting to be ready. Start being willing. God will handle the rest. I will be with you. 4 words, the only resume you'll ever need. So what's your burning bush? Not metaphorically. Right now, today. What has God been putting in front of you that you keep walking past? What conversation have you been avoiding? What step have you been refusing to take? What calling have you been burying under excuses? I'm too old. Moses was 80. I've done too much wrong. Moses was a murderer. Nobody will listen to me. Moses couldn't even speak clearly. I don't have the resources. Moses had a stick. A stick. That's it. A wooden shepherd's staff. And with that stick, and the God who wouldn't take no for an answer, he faced down the most powerful empire on earth. He split an ocean. He freed a nation. He changed the course of human history. You don't need more resources. You don't need more education. You don't need more time. You need to stop saying, send someone else, and start saying, here I am. Moses stood at the edge of the Red Sea with an army behind him and an ocean in front of him. And instead of running, he lifted a stick. That's all God asks. Lift the stick. Take the step. Open your mouth. Show up. He'll do the rest. Go to the comments, write, "Here I am," not as a slogan, as a prayer, as a contract between you and the God who won't stop calling your name. And send this to one person, just one, the person hiding in their own desert right now, the person who thinks they're too broken, too old, too late, too disqualified. Send them this and say nothing else. Let Moses say it for you. I will be with you. Next time on Word to Life, a woman was told she was too old for a miracle. She laughed at God, and God laughed back, with a baby in her arms. Her name was Sarah, and her story is next. This is Word to Life. I'll see you in the next one.